qualifiers belong with exceptions, not expertise. So when you're talking about your process, your pricing, your timeline, your boundaries, your expectations, your expertise, state it. Don't qualify it. Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki, your own personal sales maven, here to offer you tips and strategies and techniques to master your sales conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about the importance behind when and when not to use a qualifier, because when you qualify yourself in your sales conversations, you can often diminish your authority and your credibility. So this particular episode came from a conversation that I was having over Voxer with one of my private coaching clients. She actually asked me to give some reasoning behind two words. And this particular question, I've never actually been asked before. Nobody has picked up on this and asked me for my answer, which I definitely have an answer. But sometimes until somebody asks me, I don't really realize that this is something I haven't talked about, or it's not something that I have clarified. So this is why I'm bringing this episode to you. I'm super grateful that she asked me. Now, we were in a group setting earlier in the week, and she had noticed some language that was coming up. And so then privately, she reached out to me and asked me later about these two words that were being used over and over again. The words were typically and usually. So a lot of times you hear people say things like, typically our process works like this, or we usually do it this way. And so she was asking, is that a good thing? Is that not a good thing? When would you use it? When would you not use it? And why, right? So usually and typically are qualifiers. And let me dig into a little bit about what is a qualifier. So let's define that. What I mean when I'm talking about qualifiers is they're the words that we often use, but we don't even notice them anymore. A qualifier is a word or phrase that softens, limits, or creates uncertainty around what you're saying. It leaves the door open instead of making a clear statement. So sometimes qualifiers are useful. They can certainly have a purpose, and I'm going to address that today on the episode. And often they can weaken your message without you even realizing it. So here's an example of two statements, same statement, one with a qualifier and one without. Our process is this, or our process is typically this. You hear the qualifier typically in there. Which one has more authority? Which one is going to create confidence and clarity in the mind or in the listener, right? Of the other person. How is that going to be received? These little words is going to either establish our authority, establish our credibility, or they're going to detract from it. So this isn't about grammar. I want to be really clear here that this is about confidence. So what I had shared with her is typically and usually are fantastic qualifiers when you want to point something out that what we're going to do together is different, right? That is a prime opportunity of when to use a qualifier, when you're making an exception for somebody, because it is important if you are going to make exceptions for your process, your pricing, your something that the other person understands that this is not typical, that there's an exception being made, there's a favor being extended. These are prime opportunities to use qualifiers. So here would be an example. You might say, well, typically, I would meet with you every other week. And because of your timeline, we're going to set it up where we meet weekly, right? That's appropriate. Typically works there as a qualifier because it establishes that this is something that's different from our natural flow, right? But when you're talking about your process, typically and usually, if you're not making an exception, if you're not making a change, those words diminish the statement and the credibility. So qualifiers can create doubt. By putting a qualifier in your statements, it shows that there's an opportunity for something to be different. So you unintentionally communicate things like, well, maybe, or well, sometimes, or like, well, we'll see how it goes, right? Or unless you do this, You're not going to get that, right? So these things don't make rapport deposits in the rapport bank account with a prospective client. They often can be like mini withdrawals because the person starts to like, there's doubt created in their mind. So let me give you some more examples here. So instead of saying, so typically our projects last 6 to 8 months, you don't need the qualifier. Just say our project lasts 6 to 8 months. Or instead of usually this is how the onboarding works, you would say, here's how onboarding works. You notice the difference in the confidence and the way that is received when you hear it. It's like, oh, okay. Like that feels like you're creating safety for me as the buyer because you're standing in your place of expertise and you're guiding what is going to happen for me. So you're creating a productive, useful, and safe buying environment to move forward with you for your buyer. And I also want to point out that there's one place, and I believe I've done episodes about this, or at least an episode about this in the past, that the most dangerous place to add a qualifier, and one of the biggest mistakes that people make with using qualifiers is when they're talking about their pricing. Because again, qualifiers create doubt. It opens up the opportunity that something can be different. So if you want to negotiate the price that you're going to give to a client and let them want to negotiate it with you, by all means, put a qualifier in it. But I find most of my clients are like, I want to just be able to say my price and for the person to be like, okay, all right, well, make sure there's no qualifier in front of the word price. This is actually one of my first sales lessons. I remember in my early 20s, in my first professional sales career job, that we had somebody, he was never my manager, but he was high up in the organization. I can't even remember. He had a bunch of different titles, but essentially he was like third or fourth in command of the company that I worked for. And from time to time, he would do little mini trainings for us as a sales team. And because he'd been in sales for many years, he'd managed many salespeople, and he became my mentor. I've mentioned him before. I still like to say his name. He has passed, and I miss him terribly. But for 20 years, he was my mentor, Russ Short. And he taught me this idea of a qualifier. He said, Nikki, when you state your price, you state it as if you're saying the time of day. And so this idea of like the price is, so you don't say, well, typically the price is, or usually the price is, or your price today is, unless you're pointing out that it's different than the norm. But if you're just giving a price to a client, you do not put a qualifier in front of price. So you might, example again, somebody says, well, typically we charge $5,000 for that service. That immediately sends the message to the mind of the person you're in conversation with. Oh, there's some negotiating to be done here. There's some wiggle room. Something is going to be different, right? But if you don't want to have any kind of negotiation around that, then you could just say the investment for that is $5,000. Or our usual fee is, no, just say the fee is. No apology, no softening, no explanation, just clarity. Now, as women, qualifiers are something that many of us do, and we do it at an unconscious level now. Like it's just something that we do because we're taught to make other people feel comfortable. We want to speak soft. We don't want to come across aggressive or pushy, all the things that I think attracts people to the sales training that I teach, right? Because I don't want you to be pushy and aggressive either. But qualifiers are not something that is sending the message of like, oh, I'm just being kind here. No, it's sending the message of like, negotiate with me, push back. I can be pushed over on this particular issue, unless, again, we want to point something out that it's different than the norm. Then you use a qualifier. But in business, it is definitely not in your best interest to speak from that place of qualifiers in front of your statements. So this isn't about being harsh or being rigid or, being aggressive. It's really just about clarity. The more clear you make it for somebody, the easier it is for them to take this next step with you, right? So you can say it with warmth and kindness in your voice and let that kindness come through. And I want to say also, confidence and kindness, they're not on opposite sides. Like you can be confident and kind and stand in your place of authority and make a statement. So here's kind of the authority test. Before you say something important, here's what I would ask you to ask yourself. Am I stating a fact or am I qualifying a fact? Because qualifiers belong with exceptions, not expertise. So when you're talking about your process, your pricing, your timeline, your boundaries, your expectations, your expertise, state it. Don't qualify it. You don't need the qualifier. Okay. So here's a few more examples just to, again, try to you might have got it by now. And if not, here's a few more. So typically to get started, how many times have you said that to a prospective client? Typically to get started, if you'll just state the fact and say, here's how to get started. Oh, so much better. Instead of saying something like, well, usually we would start at the first of the month. You just say, this process starts on the first of every month, right? Like just stand in that place of state the fact. Or our normal turnaround is, no, just say the turnaround for this project is this. State it as a fact. Because normal implies that there could be something unnormal, not normal, right? Like it's just not needed. So instead of well, we generally charge, right? Or we generally ask you to pay, 50% up front. Just say the agreement is that you pay 50% up front and then the other 50% is split over 2 months or whatever that is. But no, generally, no, not needed. Kind of is another one. Well, we kind of ask that you blah, blah, blah. No. We ask that you do blah, 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 right? We charge this. The price is this, right? Just let go of these qualifiers because it really does build your authority, your expertise, your credibility in the conversation, and it creates safety in the mind of the buyer because they're like, oh, I'm talking to somebody who is clear. I know what to do next in the process because they made it so easy for me. All right. So as we wrap up this episode, the next time you're in a sales conversation, start to pay attention to the words that are sneaking into your sentences. How often and again, you can, well, if you're using Zoom, I think if you have a paid account, you can do the notes, right? It gives you the transcript. You could go through that transcript and call out, do a search, have AI help you with this and ask, how many times are you saying usually, typically, kind of, just, maybe, generally? And then ask yourself, is the qualifier creating clarity or is it quietly giving away my expertise and my authority? Is it diminishing clarity for the buyer, for the prospect? Now, before we really wrap up, I want to again state that qualifiers do have a purpose. They're perfect to use when you want to call attention to that you're going to make an exception for this person, that you're going to do something different, that this process for them is going to be special in some way. Great. If you want to use a qualifier in that case, that's a great time to use typically, usually, right? Or generally, blah, blah, blah. And in your case, and then you state the fact of what you're doing differently, right? So if you're going to use a qualifier as a way of making an exception, think about adding the fact statement of what is going to happen afterwards. This will just boost your credibility in that conversation significantly. All right. But when you're describing your expertise, your pricing, your process, your expectations, all of those things, let go of any unnecessary qualifiers. Because remember, you're the expert. We want to buy from experts. We want to, give our money to somebody who we feel confident that they're going to deliver. And you want to be able to send that message to your client that when you hire me, you can expect a confident delivery. You can expect that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. So therefore, those qualifiers, they just got to go. So I'll leave you with this. Qualifiers belong with exceptions, not expertise. As always, I'm wishing you continued success in all you're doing. And I'd love to hear what was your big takeaway from this particular episode. If you are inclined, please reach out and share with me what qualifier have you been using that you're going to let go of? Or have you noticed that when you're stating your facts, all of a sudden your credibility and your confidence in the conversation boosts? Or if you're like, I'm not sure about this, Nikki, I want to hear about that too. All right. Have a great rest of your day. As always, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Sales Maven. Visit us online at yoursalesmaven.com/maven for more resources to boost your confidence and skills.